Well, good afternoon, social workers of Minnesota and beyond. My name is Dr. Karen Goodenough. I'm Executive Director at NASW Minnesota, and I am super excited to have you join us for today's session, What Are You Worth? Job Search and Negotiation for Social Workers. This is just a 1-hour session. It is absolutely not long enough to talk about all the things that we really want to talk about today, but we're going to get through as much as we can. And we're going to be talking a little bit about both some thoughts for those of you who are thinking about a change or a new challenge, right? So you're already in the field of social work and you're thinking about doing something new and different potentially, or all of you new grads out there. By the way, congrats to all of our new grads who are just finishing up for the year. It's really fun to have you with us also and to have you joining us out in the field of social work. So in today's session, we're going to be talking about how do you get into that position that you aspire to in today's current economy? And also, how do you approach those conversations about negotiation of your salary, about other benefits like getting your licensure fees paid for, your supervision, your continuing ed, maybe your NASW membership, all sorts of things. We have today with us a fantastic panel to share their experience, their expertise, their insights on their own moves as a social worker, and also to help you get some ideas for how to talk about yourself and your experience and what you bring to the table in ways that translate into salary and benefits that you deserve. So I want to welcome our panel for today's session. I'm going to have each of our panelists introduce themselves and share their most important pointer for job search and negotiation. So I'll go first. I already said I'm Karen Goodenough from NASW Minnesota. I've been a social worker for well over 2 decades now, from direct practice and most of my career in macro practice. I've also done a ton of hiring of social workers and supervising of social workers and interns and all sorts of people over my career. And so in my hiring mode, I would say my most important pointer for all of you is to be your own best advocate. That some of you are like, that is so egotistical. I just have a hard time talking about myself and that sort of thing. And I have to say to you, I'm sorry, but this is your job right now. You have to advocate for yourself. You have to get good at talking about yourself. You have to be able to talk about what you're great at, what you're trying to grow, where you want to take your professional journey. And I know that's hard for you all, but here's the thing is that those folks on the other side of that interview table, they don't know you. And I don't want you to leave it up to them to read between the lines. I've sat through so many interviews where I'm thinking, I think this person might be great, but I can't quite tell. And I need them to tell me what they're great at. I don't want to have to try to edge it out of you also. So that would be my one piece of advice. I think the other from my journey is be open to where the journey takes you. I, at one point in my career, thought I was, I'm going to go get my PhD and I'm going to teach, or I'm going to be an executive director. And it turns out that I'm both of those things, which is beautiful. And it fits so nicely for me. But I had no idea, especially when I graduated with my BSW, or even right after my MSW, that this is where I was going to end up and all of the things that would be in my expertise. And so I think just opening yourself up to where your career takes you also, it will take you further than you can ever imagine. So with that, I want to turn it over to our first panelist. Let's go, actually, we're going to skip around a little bit. We'll go to Lior first. So Liora goes by Lior. Thanks so much for being with us today. Go ahead and introduce yourself to our crew today.
Wonderful. So as Karen said, I'm Lior. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a fairly recent graduate, just 1 year out, graduated in spring of 2021. And I have my LGSW, licensed graduate social worker licensure, working towards my LICSW. I am currently a psychotherapist at Edge's Wellness Center and have recently gone through a bit of a job search where I just transitioned to Edge's. So I'll definitely be talking about some of that. I'm also in my second career. I spent 15 years working in the human resources field and left that field in 2019 to begin my graduate studies. So that definitely informs some of my ideas around job search. My most important pointer is to really do your research. Get to know the organizations that you're applying for and really dive into what is the organization's culture. So is it a culture that's one that's going to help you really meet your values and live up to your values? That's really the most important thing for me.
Love it. Thanks so much, Lior. Next, we're going to go to Janelle. Janelle, introduce yourself. Share some things about you.
Hi, I'm Janelle Slobov. I'm a Minnesota raised social worker and trained social worker, but my body is most of the time in New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm licensed in Minnesota, Louisiana, and Florida. I spent most of my clinical direct practice career working in healthcare settings, 6 different hospitals around the country. And currently have a private practice providing supervision for licensure. And I'm the administrator of the professional matrix, which matches supervisors and supervisees. I've supervised for the last, oh goodness, I've been in MSW for over 25 years. I've supervised people for the last 20 plus years. I'm honored to be here today with this great panel, and I'd like to share some of what my supervisees and I have learned on our own individual paths, and then our paths together as a coach of many supervisees recently who've made a lot of career job transitions. The most important pointer, there's so many, but the one I'm gonna go with right up front is to be creative about your possibilities. You might need a full-time job. Think about putting together two half-time jobs. Get your foot in the door to what you like. I did that when I first graduated. I had 2 part-time jobs and one of them had benefits, so that was great. And then I was offered more hours and a full-time job eventually. So it got my foot in the door. Another is don't just apply for full-time jobs thinking you're going to make a certain amount of money. I applied for an 80% job and got offered that job that was more 80% than a full-time job was that I was leaving. So be creative and think creatively.
Love it. Thanks so much, Janelle. And last but not least is our incoming board chair, Angelo Flowers. Angelo.
Hi, everybody. I'm Angelo Flowers. Thank you, Karen, for that marvelous introduction, in the words of Bette Midler. I am with the Minnesota Department of Human Services, and my background is in governmental, state government. So my background has greatly been impacted by that. I guess one of the most significant things that I would like folks coming into the profession to know is that life happens and it takes time to get to where you want to be, right? As long as you are moving, slow progress is still progress. And just to piggyback off of what Lenore and Janelle said, I would agree with those sentiments. I thought that I'm a little behind the 8 ball. Like I thought that by 25, I would have my PhD, I would be somewhere completely different. And I did not have those things. So, being patient with yourself, knowing that it takes time to get there, and cut yourself some slack. Not to say you shouldn't be always moving or planning ahead, but try not to let that inner saboteur that comes from like comparing ourselves to other folks get in the way. When I was in undergrad, my roommates were engineering majors. And so when they got out of school, they were making 70, 80 grand. And I was struggling to find a position at all. And that can certainly make you feel less than. It can make you feel like, oh my God, what did I do? Why didn't I become a doctor like my mother wanted me to be, in that space. And so you find your way, you find your groove, and you will land exactly where you're supposed to be when you are supposed to be there. That's what I want you to take from this.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks, Angelo. I think along your journey, every one of us along our journeys will continue to find inspiring role models and people that were like, okay, that's interesting. I like what they're saying about how they got from point A to point B, and then you watch people go from point A to point Z, and you're like, dang, like just watching all of my friends and colleagues move through their careers is so fun and fascinating, and also how is inspiring to me also. And so I don't want any of you in this space to think like, oh, listen to, what they're saying, that sort of thing. Like I could never, that sort of thing. Like there's so much ahead for every single one of us, including all of your panelists here today. We're all at a point in our journey. And so this conversation about job search negotiation, like it's not over for us. We might have had more experience doing this for a few times or more recent or whatnot. We might have helped other people through it, that sort of thing, but our journeys are still going. So we're all still learning and figuring this out as we go. Just a couple of little housekeeping things before we dive into our conversation for today's session. One is that this session is being recorded. And so if you missed the introductions and you're like, wait, I missed something there, you can go back and watch it. And if you have friends and colleagues that missed today's session and they are interested in hearing what we have to say, this one, because it was a free session, we are going to put it up on our YouTube channel. So it will be on NASW Minnesota's YouTube channel, along with a bunch of other things that we think are interesting and a little bit timeless, and people can come back and watch it. If you are with us live today, it counts as a live in-person CEU. And if you are watching the recording, it counts as an independent study or independent learning CEU. And if you're outside of Minnesota, you might have to figure out what that means in the context of your state, because just a note to everyone in your brains, licensure is different in every state. Okay, so if we talk about things today that have anything to do with licensure, like continuing ed requirements, things like that, just note that they'll be different based on every state that you look at. Side note, I have lots of things I'd love to share with you about licensure, which we are not going to talk much about today, because job search and negotiation is like one whole thing in itself. There are a bunch of topics we'll talk about today that could be whole sessions in themselves. A note that we are planning at the chapter to host a 1 hour similar type of session about licensure in particular in the coming months, and we'll let folks know when that is happening. And we're also planning to record it and get it out, because we get lots and lots of questions and thoughts about licensure. A note about questions and comments. If you use the chat today, I encourage you to use it to send questions and comments specifically to our panelists for today's session. I ask you to please not use the chat as a side conversation. It is very distracting for our attendees when there are two conversations happening, one in the room and one in the chat. And so I encourage you to simply use the chat as a space for asking questions or making a comment for the session. That being said, anything you send in there, we will try to answer it as we go. I'll be paying attention to that, and we'll try to hit on things when it makes sense. If I don't answer your question right away, just hold, because it likely means we're planning to talk about that in just a little bit. We are also hoping to have a few minutes at the end of today's session for some additional Q&A, so we might hold some things until the very end. Your CE, just a note, will be emailed to you along with your slides for today's session. So don't feel like you need to scribble down all the things that we talk about as we go. With that, let's dive in, folks. So you know our panel. Here's who's talking to you today. The other thing we want you to know is that this is absolutely an employee's market. It is a different job search space than we have been in as a profession for a while. We are also seeing massive increases in the numbers of social workers being needed in our world today, both nationally and in Minnesota. Okay, and I did not include data on that because that will get us off track, but I promise you we are growing on average about 13 to 14%, which is one of the highest, actually it is the highest growing or largest growth rate expected for any profession in the country in the next, from 2020 to 2030. Most areas of practice are growing about 14%. We also have a pretty significant number of people who are retiring or leaving our profession, but most of those due to retirements. And that means that there is room for even more of us potentially. The good news is that our BSW and MSW programs are growing their number of graduates. But I want you to all hear us today that this is an employees market, which means you are in a very good place for asking for and receiving what you want and deserve, and for asking for those things, but also getting roles that you may have not been able to get before, that may have been harder. Someone who's been in the field for a while might give you advice that's like, oh, don't bother applying for those things. You don't qualify. I want you to ignore them. And I want you to listen to us and hear that there is room for you to grow into positions right now in our current economy. All right, so to frame today's session, we are going to be using this really great article that came out very recently in the New Social Worker, and it's called How to Begin Your Social Work Career During the Great Resignation. So as I said, the US is in the middle of the most significant labor shortage in history right now. This means we have massive bargaining power. So this particular article offers 10 pieces of advice for social workers during the Great Resignation. We're going to use this as a frame. And Jamie, the author of this article, was actually a mentor of Angelos. So cool that one of our people knows them. So I love that. So let's dive right into some of the thoughts from this particular article. So the first piece of advice is to only apply for your dream jobs. Now, students often ask if they should take their first offer or hold out for their dream job. And COVID has taught us that we can live with a lot less until we get what we want. So for some of us, we're like, no, this matters. We're seeing a lot of research coming out saying that, many of us are unwilling to take something as less than exactly what we're looking for. So we also know that one of the primary reasons that people leave their jobs is because it's not in line with their purpose and where they want to be. So what I don't want you to do is take something that doesn't feel like it's the right fit. It doesn't align with who you are or where you want to go, because in my experience, it matters. And I don't want you to have to settle. All right. So just a note, when you are interviewing folks, when you are interviewing or you're being interviewed for a position, you are interviewing that organization too. So as Lior was talking about in their introduction, like, learn about them, figure it out. What is it that they're all about? Okay. There's just so many things that can help us make decisions about what is that right fit. Lior and Jenelle, I know, have some thoughts about this particular step. So let's go to Lior first. What are you thinking people should know about when they're choosing what to even apply for?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate your mentioning that the concept of interviewing the organization, because that's so important. And that also really brings me to my main thought about this, is to lean into that really social work concept of self-reflection. Applying for your dream job means figuring out what is your dream job. It's probably like the step zero of job search is, what do you want out of a job? And there are so many different things to consider. What's the work you're going to do, your pay, your benefits, the culture, and that values aspect. So research yourself a little first, and then research that organization.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's really good. I think also, Lior, it's sometimes we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So I've heard so many new grads, even recently, when I'm like, well, what are you looking for? So I can help connect you to agencies or people to talk to. And they're like, well, I could do so many things, and I could do kids, and I could do old people, and I could do this kind of setting or that. And I'm like, okay, I need you to focus for me, because I can't help you until you can articulate for me what feels like it might fit. And you still might try a job or 2 or 10 that you do for shorter periods of time and say that wasn't it. And our hope is that you get through some internships and things, and you're like, okay, I've crossed some things off my list. But I've absolutely over my career have crossed things off my list as I've gone also. So I don't want people to feel stuck, like I have to know. But I need you, when you call me or you call my colleagues to get pointers and get connections and things, I want you to be as clear as you can. Like my ideal is a position that looks like these kinds of things with these kinds of populations in this geographic area. Like you should be able to be really clear about this is my ideal. I'm open, but you have some visions. You need to be able to articulate that. Thanks for that, Lior.
Self-reflection is
Yeah.
really important, and it can be informal self-reflection, or it could be more formal self-reflection. For example, when I didn't know what I wanted to do in undergrad, my dad said, go to the career counseling office. I took a class that gave me a number of different assessment tools. What's my style? What do I need in a workplace? You could do some of more of that formal assessment as well to gain that self-reflection.
Absolutely. Janelle, anything else you wanted to share on that one?
Yeah. I think also you can't find out what your dream job is unless you're talking to people and learning about what they do and what that organization is. People love to talk about themselves. Nobody's ever going to turn you down to set up a meeting to learn about them and learn about their career path. I'm certainly not going to turn any social worker down if they would like to know that about my path specifically. But what I did when I moved to Florida, well, before I moved to Florida, is I set up informational interviews. I sent emails out to many different professionals. And I said, I'm interested in your organization. I'm thinking of relocating. Can we meet and talk? And I talked with about 6 different places. And a week later, I had a job offer. I didn't go into those intending for a job offer, but it was a way to learn. And they knew if I was going to be a fit, and I knew if they were going to be a fit by then. So some suggestion is get creative, set up appointments, talk with people.
Yeah. I think those informational interviews are so valuable. And I want people to hear too, that I think there's a pre-step 1 here that's pre-apply for jobs. And it is doing your homework on the organizations, as Lior was talking about earlier. And it's also making connections. And I've had many people, especially licensed supervisees, who are either wanting to move to a new location or live in a place where there are not a ton of openings. And what I encourage them to do is figure out what the organizations are that you would want to work for, particularly people in rural parts of the state. I live in northern Minnesota, and in rural parts of the state in particular, there's only a handful of organizations, and you know them. You know who you'd like to work for. So I've heard people say things like they never have openings. And when they do open, I've never gotten an interview. And so I say to them, the best advice I can give you is ask the leader in that organization for coffee. Ask them out to lunch, and you get in front of their face and you talk about, here's what I'm looking for. I know you don't have any openings, but I'd be interested in talking to you when you know something is coming. I literally could name 2 people who did that and had a beautiful, like they're still in those roles, and had a beautiful opportunity arrive for them that was not posted, that the leader in that organization said when they took them out for that coffee and said, we've been thinking about this type of position and you seem like you'd be great for that. I'll let you know as soon as it gets posted. And they got that job. So I want you to think about, like, jobs are not developed at the moment of posting. They're developed usually for a time period before that. Organizations know. I can already tell you all that I'm likely hiring a new contract staff next year. I don't even have the grant yet, but if I get it, and I'm pretty sure we are, I know I have an opening coming. So I'm already starting to think about who could those potential candidates be. So I want you to think like there's a pre-thing here also to do some of that homework. All right, let's move to step 2. Oh, go ahead.
One of my supervisees wanted me to make sure, and I don't know if she's here today or not, wanted me to make sure to remind people, if you applied for your dream job and interviewed and didn't get the job, then it doesn't mean that you're not right for that job. It might just mean it's not the right time for you for that job. She then applied for that job 2 years later. And with it took a lot of guts on her part because she had been rejected, she felt. And then she applied for it 2 years later. And because of her additional experience, she now has her dream job. So don't say that no, don't think that no means no forever. It means no right now.
Yeah. Right. No right now in this space also. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving. Each of our panelists has already said some things they're going to chime in, and they're going to have lots of ideas along other ones too, but I want us to get through a bunch of things for our audience today. So the second one is, it's okay to apply for jobs for which you are not qualified, okay? Historically, HR professionals, human resource professionals have advised people that you'll get weeded out if you don't meet those minimum qualifications. That is absolutely currently not the case. I heard from actually another organization this morning who said they have multiple openings and they are not receiving applicants. There are more jobs than there are applicants right now, which means if you throw your name in for something, you might be the very best candidate they have, even if you don't meet all of even the minimum qualifications. Okay, so don't weed yourself out by not applying. I tell my folks that I'm coaching, like, folks, you won't be in the running if you don't throw your name in. So don't make that decision for them. Throw your name in. There's also a lot of research on gendered sorts of things here, and class sorts of things, and all sorts of things where people sort of limit themselves. Women in particular traditionally apply for things where they only know or meet at least 90% of the qualifications. Men apply for things where they know 10%. Okay? I want you to all think about, it does not matter where you fall on the gender spectrum at all, anywhere, you should throw yourself into the pool. Allow yourself to be considered. Okay? Now, our next one is being honest in the interview about what you can provide and what you don't know. I think this is always true. Even if you applied for something you didn't fully meet all the qualifications, you still don't pretend you know things that you don't actually know. Okay, so I want you to be honest about your knowledge and your experience and that sort of thing, but you can also talk about your confidence in your ability to learn and to figure things out. And, I'm often saying to folks, I am a quick learner. And here's an example of how I've moved from point A to point B and to C, and, that sort of thing, and show them that you feel like you can. And again, that's part of that selling yourself piece. They don't know that, but if you share it, it can help.
And start that
Our
with
next,
your cover letter. Your
yeah,
selling points in your cover letter.
Absolutely, Janelle. Do you have any thoughts about what they put in that cover letter? Like,
well,
what does that look like, do you think?
For example, with licensure, if you're almost an they say they want an LICSW, but you're like 4 months or 5 months away, you can explain that in there. Explain what skills you have that speak directly to what they're asking for, and spell it out for them. Because I've had supervisors say, well, I don't see you have this experience. Well, they were not looking far enough down in my Vita to see that. I needed to spell that out in that letter for them.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Pull the posting and use those words that they are using, and then speak to that. So if they're looking for someone who can do spreadsheets, talk about your experience in Excel or something like that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Angelo. Is when people are like, make sure your cover letter aligns with the particular position. That's what we're talking about, is like literally use their language. If they say they want someone who's organized and thoughtful and deals well with details, you better talk about being organized and thoughtful and dealing well with details. Like, use their words, right? The other thing that I wanted to comment on that Janelle was bringing up was related to out of state or out of town job search. It is really helpful if you say in your cover letter, I am intending to move to your state. I am intending to move by this period of time. Because what happens is if I get a resume of someone who lives in Florida and they say nowhere that they actually want to work and move to Minnesota, I'm like, what? Don't leave it up to them to have to read between the lines. You should just say in your letter, my family and I are moving to Minnesota. We will be there by February. I'm interested in, that sort of thing. Or maybe it's a virtual position. It doesn't matter, but you should be clear about, especially that move thing.
Just take it off. Just take your address off
your
resume.
But
a resume is not a legal binding document. An application is something else, right? So you should put your address on there. But when I was moving to Minnesota, I removed my address for that reason, because I didn't want them to filter through it if they saw an out-of-state address. All I need is an interview, right? I need you to call me and tell me that you want to interview me. We can talk about everything else in that interview.
Absolutely.
I used
Yeah.
my cousin's address in Florida.
I know
So
that's
I
right.
did have an address. It was just my cousin's address. And it was where I was going to live for a while. So
Yep.
no lie.
I
Yep.
love that. Good creative
creative.
thoughts. Yeah. The other tip, just since we're on it, on resumes and that sort of thing, please, all of you graduating students or people who've graduated a long time ago, get yourself a Gmail address. Don't use your school address, because people's brains, it's a bias thing. And so if you've graduated 5 years ago and you're still using your school email address, people look at your resume, they read the top and they think you're a new grad because you have a school email address. Okay, so I want you to take all of that weird, and then you have to make sure it's not some weird, wacky Gmail address. Mine is karen.goodenough@gmail.com. Like, make it easy, make it just you, not Sunny Flowers and all the nice things at Yahoo, right? Just little things, right? You don't, again, you don't want any reason for it to be called out of something.
I'm laughing because my last name is Flowers, so Sunny
Oh, yeah.
Flowers would be.
You can say Sunny Flowers.
I can say, yeah, but
You
I
could. I love that.
I would also say it is important to tailor. I know it's a lot of work, guys. I know, but every single application should be tailored. Like, your material should be tailored to that application. Like, you should not have, it is embarrassing and horrifying if you put the wrong company name in the cover letter because you were using the same template. I don't know if that's something that you could come back from, right? So you want to make sure that you are reading those things, that you're making those changes. But also, if you are applying for a job at a particular, let's say you were going into child welfare, it's okay to only put job experience or work experience, volunteer experience that is related to that position. You don't need to put that you were a lifeguard at summer camp. You don't need to put that you were, a server at the Applebee's. You just put the experience that's relevant, because the other, it's too much. It's convoluted unnecessarily.
Yeah. I think especially for new grads, folks, put your social work related experience, volunteer, internships, and work experience. If it's social work related, put it on there. Yeah. That said, I have lots of questions still from people who are long-standing social workers who are like, my resume is too long. And I say to them, you are 50 years old. Your resume better be long.
No one-pagers.
And they're like, I have to get it on a page. I said, no. The one-page rule is for a brand new grad who's trying to make the lifeguard thing a big deal. And we're like, it really doesn't matter, right? Or server thing. You brand new grads, absolutely. If you can fit it on a page, beautiful, be clear, be concise. But once you're past that, everyone in this room has a multiple page resume, because you need to continually list all those things you've done over time, volunteer, all of your work experience. It should be clear that you've done lots of different things over time, or a few things for long periods. And that is beautiful. Do not cull back your resume because you think it's too much information. People want to know about you, and they expect there are gaps. Like, if you leave something off, like Lior was talking about, working for a decade plus in human resources, it's not social work, but they better be putting that on the resume, because that is so helpful as context for why I would hire Lior in all sorts of positions. Like, this person has all sorts of insights from a previous career. If you were anything in a previous career, put it on there. And then in your cover letter, you could even describe, I worked for a decade in this area, and I moved from being an accountant to a social worker 5 years ago. And like, tell people what that story was, and they'll let them sort of make decisions about it instead of calling it out.
Yep, I think
Okay.
that answers the question that was in the chat about navigating those gaps. You can certainly put
Yeah.
that in the.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks
And that
for
I
catching
think
that.
really, that I think really fits with something Karen said earlier about not making the employer read between the lines. Really, you've got to do the work ahead of time of reading between their lines and kind of proactively responding to some questions that they might be asking.
Yes. Okay, let's keep moving, folks. We have lots to talk about, and I know people want to get to the negotiation stuff too. So let's talk about step 4, which is inquiring about the employer supports, how the employer supports employees. Angelo and Lior, I know you both had thoughts on that. Why don't we go to Angelo first?
Sure. So
What do you think?
I have a lot of opinions about this. Like first of all, it's a little bit of a gotcha, because at one point in employment land, people seeking job opportunities were left on red, ghosted, not like you would have 2 and 3 interviews and then they would choose someone else and not even have the decency to call you back, right? And now the shoe is on the other foot. And so now is an opportunity for you to get everything that you want and that you need in order for you to be successful. And so when you are going into an interview, you are also being interviewed, but you are also interviewing them. And it's important for you to always have questions to ask during that interview. You should always be prepared. So you should be asking questions specifically about the position, specifically about professional development, about the company, about career advancement, your performance review, and then that thing that they call company culture, right? You want to ask those types of questions. Particularly, I want to speak to Black, Brown, Indigenous peoples, and folks of color. When we talk about entering in the workspace, and we've used this word fit quite a bit today in the previous steps, I want us to be mindful that that fit, that idea of standards of professionalism are heavily defined by white culture, white supremacy culture. And going into these spaces, whiteness is centralized. And so it is important for us to build relationships. Maybe like I found Black employees on LinkedIn and sent them messages to ask what their specific experience was. And yes, granted, is that individual's experience, but it is insightful to ask how are they supporting you? I am on your website and I see that you are the only Black person in management. What is that like for you? Because we don't all want to be, well, I don't want to speak for everyone, but many of us don't want to be direct care workers forever. We want to ascend, like we want to go into supervision and management and things like that. And so it's important to know what that will look like for us specifically as Black and Brown people. And so being able to ask, what kind of training am I going to get? Do they support, they call them ERGs, employee resource groups, things like that, affinity groups in the workplace? Are they going to allow you to go to conferences and other professional opportunities? Do they talk about implicit bias or anti-racism in that? Like, that is important for us to know, to navigate that, because those policies around dress code, speech, work style, timeliness, all of those are tenets of white supremacy culture. And those are things that are often ways that we find ourselves on the other side of a pink slip. So inquire about those things on the onset so that you know whether or not you will fit there. Yeah.
Lior, did you have additional thoughts on that one?
I really just want to underline that culture. In addition to everything Angelo mentioned, other things to consider are those intangible things like, how does an organization handle conflict? Are they trauma informed? How well do they support folks who are experiencing secondary vicarious trauma? Is your supervision setup going to be approachable? Like, how how well can you manage up as well as being managed down?
Mhm.
Those are all really, really good things to
Yeah,
consider.
absolutely. I wanted to add that down that same vein, that the number one reason that people leave their employer is because of their supervisor. So if when you are interviewing with a place, you do not feel a good connection, link, that good relationship for learning sort of thing that is necessary for good reflective supervision, you need to listen to that in yourself. Okay? Just please listen to that.
Listen
Also,
to your inner voice for sure.
yes, absolutely. That supervisor is going to matter. The second is that I think for me, one of the most important things I learned years and years in was how important it is to work for leaders that I can trust and I respect, period. And if I can't, it's likely not going to work well for me to be in that place. And I won't learn as much and I won't grow as much. And so I want you all to be really thoughtful. You might think, well, I'm a direct line staff. It doesn't really matter if I think the CEO is cool or not. And I want to be like, but I want you to listen to them and read some of the things they've written and how do they think about the work? And do you feel like you align with the way that they run the agency? That
Right.
matters. It matters.
Definitely
Okay,
does.
I'm gonna keep us moving. No.
Can I say one
Yes,
more
please.
thing? Okay. I know that we might be far away from this time when we had in-person interviews, but one of the things that I did during the interviewing process is I would ask them before I left, can you show me where I'm going to be sitting?
Yes.
And so they would take me through the agency or whatever and show me the little cubicle that I would be sitting at if I were hired, right? Part of that is to get them to envision me working there, right? So it's a little bit reverse psychology, but also if this company is telling you that they have a commitment to diversity and you walk through that building and you don't see anybody who looks like you, how the hell are they saying that they support, that's one of their values, right? When everybody there looks the same. And so that's a way for you to see the environment that you're going to be working in. So I just wanted to share that too, in terms of supporting employees.
I have a supervisor who has been placed in a closet for her office. If she had asked for that and been taken to see the closet, she would have maybe made a different decision.
I had a very similar situation myself.
Like a broom closet.
I got put in the back of a room that had no windows behind a cube wall. Like it was horrible. And if I would have known that, absolutely would not have even taken the position. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about flex schedules and what we can ask for in terms of, what else do we need to make this work in our lives? Janelle, you had some thoughts about that one.
Yeah, so a lot of people that I supervise work in hospital settings or in healthcare settings where we have weekends that, it's a 24/7 operation. And most social workers who work in hospital settings work a weekend at some point. Asking that question in the beginning, how often am I going to be working weekends if weekend rotation is a thing? And does everybody in this department work the same numbers of rotations? Or our new hires, it's kind of a red flag, our new hires having to work every 4th and people who've been there for a while work every 8th, and there's no chance to ever change. You want to know that kind of stuff. You also want to think about self-care. And we know that in the Code of Ethics, in the last year, it's been added to the Code of Ethics, Social Work Code of Ethics, that we have to aspire to self-care. Talk about self-care and ask about if you will receive 2 days off in a row. Because if you're working weekends and you're full-time, you might not get 2 days off in a row. And are you okay with that? Are you going to be able to work 7 days in a row? Think about really the reality of the calendar and the schedule and really ask about those things before you sign on.
I think those are great points. I think also when it's a salaried or hourly position of any sort, if it's a Monday through Friday, like what are the regular work hours? How much is virtual? How much is in person? If you have preferences, you're an afternoon person, you're a morning person, like can you start early or not? What's kind of the way people normally work? Just because they say we're salaried, they may work very particular hours, or there may be a ton of flexibility in that. And so you may want to ask some questions like what works for your life If you're caring for a parent or a child, if you have your own classes or therapy or other things that you need to work around, like that's your moment to be really clear. Like, I need to be off every day by 4 o'clock to pick up a child. I need to be off every, whatever it is. And what's the flexibility like in that? I personally love my job because I can be very flexible, and that works for me. And it would be very hard for me to go back into a place where people were like, you must be here physically from this time to this time and check in, check out. Absolutely not.
And
right.
does
So
salary
you need to
mean
be
40
thought.
hours? Does salary really mean 60 hours?
Yeah.
The salary could mean we expect more from you than
what
you're saying.
Okay, we're going to get through the other 5 steps of this rather quickly because questions are starting to come into the chat about negotiation and things, and I want to make sure we get to there. So the first one, or step 6 here, is knowing your worth. And we're going to talk about salary negotiation more in depth when we get to our next slide. The second one is asking for the pay range. It is absolutely not unreasonable for you to ask. It should be very clear. Ideally, if the organization is being transparent, they will tell you what the pay range is. If you're applying for a position that's posted by the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits, folks, if you're not looking there on the MCN, Minnesota Council of Nonprofits job board, and you want a social worky sort of macro or micro job in Minnesota, you need to look there. That's the place. The thing I love about it is they require postings to put the salary range. That is best practice in our current world. If an organization is not posting it, it's not okay. They need to fix that problem. So you might not be able to say that to them, but someday I hope you'll all be able to just be very transparent about salaries. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. The next one is about asking for the job offer in writing. Sometimes we get so excited that we hear it and we only hear certain parts, and then we have all these questions. And so asking them very clearly for the offer in writing can be helpful. Angelo, you had a thought about that one in particular?
Yeah, I got done very dirty once with this. So fresh out of undergrad, I had applied for a job. I had made it through a couple rounds of interviews, and it was clear to me that I was the front runner. And then I got thrown a curveball, and I was, I didn't understand what was happening at the time. But the manager asked what about salary, and I answered the question without having an offer. And because I gave a number outside of what they were willing to pay, I then lost that opportunity. So do not negotiate salary before you get an offer in writing. And I wish that somebody would have told me that before, but I had that experience, and it's fine because they missed out. But just don't do it. What you should say is, may I have the range? Turn it around. What are you willing to pay your most qualified applicant? Like, make them answer it. Do not give them a number before you have it in writing. Just don't do it.
Thanks, Angelo. The next step is about leaving a lasting impression. And there's lots of ways that you can do this, but making sure that they've learned a little bit about you and enough that feels like you've made some kind of connection. I even had a recent intern interviewee it was a great example, did a follow-up message to me, and not just the traditional like, thank you, I'm still interested, but said, thank you. And I was thinking about that point you made about what you're looking for because one of their questions to me was, what are you looking for in interns? Who would be successful there? And I described what I'm looking for. So they followed up and said, I was thinking about that. And it makes me think of this example of when I was really independent in a project, and I'm really good at that. And it was like, nicely done. Way to hit it home, people. So think about, how is it that you leave yourself as an impression in that employer, even though there are more of you than there are jobs. It still matters that you are the one that's lifted to the top also.
If you have a challenge saying something good about yourself, Share what others have said about you, what other employers have said on
Mhm.
performance reviews, what other colleagues have said on your evaluations. That's another way to be able to sell yourself without, when you have a challenge and talking
Yeah.
yourself up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, we're going to keep moving. It's okay to say no. In
Mhm.
this current job market, as Lior was saying earlier, if it doesn't feel right, if for whatever reason it's just not the right thing, if they do you dirty, as Angelo said, like you just let it go and move on, look for the next best thing. And I know that doesn't feel like possible right now, but please just trust us all. We're saying it is absolutely okay to say no. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about negotiation and getting paid what you're worth. All right. So I want you to do your research. As all of our panelists have been saying today, you have to do your research. One of my favorite tools, and I just want to show it to you, is the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits Salary and Benefits Survey. Okay. It's paper. They also have an electronic version. You can always email me if you're looking for something in particular. It gives you a sense of where people are paid on a scale across our nonprofit sector in Minnesota. There is lots of public data out there that can help give you a sense of what the salary might be for a particular job. You can look at Glassdoor, US Labor Statistics, payscale.com, LinkedIn salary, and you can look at all sorts of comparable salaries. You can also ask people. This is not this old school thing where no one talks about money. We've learned that when we don't talk about money, we don't get paid as much as other people do. Okay.
Mhm.
And especially our BIPOC folks, people who, all sorts of diverse groups of people do not get paid equitably with our white counterparts. It is statistically, it's just true. And the more we do to be transparent about salary, which means I'm honest with people about what I make, I'm honest with people about what I made in other roles, the more we can be clear about where we all fit and be honest with each other. Like, you should be asking for this range. For that kind of job, I will be honest, I will say this is what you should get in that range. If they're not willing to do it, you have to be willing to negotiate or walk. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that negotiation means. But something I want you to think about is, what can you live on comfortably? And what do you need to feel valued as an employee? Also, remember that your salary will drive future raises, cost of living increases, that sort of thing. So if you start too low, it takes you a lot longer to get where you actually want to be. And so don't get in there and be like, well, I'll get there eventually. Like, I want you to get there, not eventually. Okay.
Mhm.
Also
Yeah.
explaining why you're worth what you're asking, talking about your competencies, your training, your certifications, concrete ways you can contribute to them, why you're worth a higher salary. One note that lots of experts are saying right now is don't cite inflation. About not quite 3/4 of companies say they will not factor inflation into salary budgets. Folks, the reality is our salaries are not going up with inflation, period. So don't use those words with people. They cannot give you a raise because of inflation. That does not exist. Are you worth more? Absolutely. Should they pay you more because our economy is such that otherwise you can go somewhere else and potentially make more? Absolutely. So there are other things that you can come back to in your negotiation, okay? Just a note also that you should do your research, and then you should spout your research right back to your employer. Based on my research, social workers in this position typically make X. Tell them okay? And also be willing to walk away. This is back to that be willing to say no thing. Don't settle for less than you're worth, okay? I want us to also dive into what else can you negotiate. During the interview process, we're talking about salary stuff, but I also want you to think about the whole package. You want a job that's fulfilling, that helps elevate your career in addition to being compensated well. And compensation is not just your salary. You have to determine what other benefits you might be interested in lieu of salary potentially. I absolutely know people who are willing to take a slightly less salary if the retirement match is that much more. If my number of weeks of vacation is that much more, right? My husband's company did a thing for several years where you could even buy vacation. So you could lower your salary and receive an extra week of vacation, that matters to some people. Okay. So I want you to think about what are you willing to negotiate? Okay. Janelle, I know you had some thoughts on some things that weren't on this slide that people could also negotiate.
One thing one of my
What are you thinking?
supervisees wanted me to share is that if they're not going to offer you a certain amount of money, will they using that as to ask for additional days of vacation or for them to pay for CEUs? So to negotiate across these areas.
Right.
And then also, if you're receiving your health insurance somewhere else, like through your parents or through a partner, will they pay you more because you won't be costing them in that health insurance line on your payroll? Is that something that's negotiable for a higher pay? I specifically think about supervision, and a lot of, because of my role of talking to a lot of people looking for supervision, a lot of places of employment will say they're going to provide supervision for you. And then in fact, when you get the job, it does not turn out. So if they're providing it for you, get it in writing in your offer letter or in an email or something, that they're going to provide this amount, and it's going to be consistent for this amount of time.
Absolutely. And I've had a lot of people having good luck negotiating things like all the licensure things on here, as well as all the additional things on here, your licensure renewals, your supervision time, as well as it being paid for, your continuing ed during work time and
During
being
work
paid for. Those are
time.
both during work time. People negotiate it, make sure they allow for that. Your liability insurance, you need your own. Everyone graduating, everyone out in the field right now, you need your own liability insurance. I don't care if your employer has it or not. Their liability insurance is there to look out for them, not you. They'll tell you, oh, sure, we have coverage. It covers you. Of course it covers you, but it covers you to their benefit, not to yours. Okay. Also, tech devices, equipment, your NASW membership. Like, there are lots of things that you might be like, this is important for me to be able to work well, and I want to negotiate it with you. I see a couple of comments coming into me in the chat with people saying, like, what happens if your organization kind of, as Angela was saying, does you dirty? Like, they might give you this great salary, but then later they hold it against you. They're kind of like, well, we paid you more, so you should work harder, or blah. I don't even know what all that is. And then someone was saying, if we can't negotiate being paid more in light of inflation and that sort of thing, like, what does that mean in light of this capitalist society that we live in? And there's a problem there. And shouldn't we name it? Absolutely, we should name it. And we name it, and we talk about, like, we just did a whole symposium session on how capitalism affects the funding for our everything that we do in our field generally, and like what we need to do about that. So it's beyond our conversation today, but I'd encourage you to continue to talk with and work with NASW on different things, because we are absolutely talking about that.
I think
anything else? Yeah, go ahead, Angelo.
Yeah, always negotiate. Like, always. I cannot think of a time where you should not. And I don't care what the position is for. I don't care what the initial offer is. Always negotiate. Because I know in the previous slide it says they expect you to. I don't know if they expect all of us to. I don't think that they expect women, LGBT, people of color. I don't think that they anticipate that we are going to counter. And so also, do not have a number like, oh, this is what I will be willing to take. No, ask them for what you want. If you know that you want 100,000, ask for the 100,000. Don't like, oh, I'm willing to take 99 and a half. Just ask for the only thing that they can say is yes or no. And I also, just because I think that this is a reasonable anxiety to have, are they going to rescind the offer because I tried to negotiate? No, they won't.
They want you.
they want you to, and they want you.
Mhm.
So I think also be prepared to, when I negotiated for my current position, it took 3 weeks. And we went back and forth about it for weeks. This is what I need for my PTO. This is what I was getting at my previous. Like, can you meet this? Like, back and forth, 3 weeks. And so do what you need to, so that you know that when you get there, you're going to be there for a while, and you're going to be there for a while because they are giving you what you need to be happy. So I would take those things into account.
And
Absolutely.
I want to add, from that HR perspective, since that was my job for a long time, HR professionals and finance staff, they're thinking about all of the things on this screen right now. And if we only focus on the salary, we're really missing part of that picture. If we're able to say, well, I would really like this supervision in lieu of this, I'd like some CEUs in lieu of this, those finance directors are going to perk up and say, hey, that's only going to cost this much. We can save this much on salary, which saves us this much on payroll taxes, and this and this and this, because there's a lot of stuff that is driven by the salary, that are expenses that as employees we don't always consider. And if we're say, hey, these other things are more important to me than this one really high figure, can we meet in the middle? They'll be excited to hear that.
Absolutely. I want to share just a couple of quick best practices on the salary side, since we haven't talked about them. We're going to go through just a couple other points on some slides very quickly, and then we're going to lose Angelo because Angelo has to go somewhere. But Janelle and Lior and I are going to stick around and answer some questions. And those of you who can stick around, please do. Those of you who have to jump off, just a reminder, we're recording this whole thing. We'll put it up on YouTube. You could even just fast forward to this, whatever you missed, and catch up later. All right.
I forgot that this was being recorded, and I said the H word.
You can say all the things, Angela. It's totally fine. It's totally fine. So on the salary side, folks, couple things is some of the best practice says to ask them first. All right. To ask the organization, if they have not posted it, to make sure that you ask them. And even if they're asking you, so say it's an interview question and they're like, can you tell us what your salary requirements are? You can turn that back to them and say, you know, I'm really interested in learning more about the position so that I know how it fits for me and what my expectations would be based on the position. I also am very interested in knowing what the salary range is that you're expecting to pay for this position, period. You don't say anything more and let them respond to you, okay? So start there. The second is, if you do need to give them a salary amount, you're expected, you should give them a range. And ideally, what you want is in the middle of that. So if as Angelo is saying, your goal is 100, you tell them 95 to 105 or 90 to 110, right? And you are expecting to have a negotiation, okay? All right, then the other is, folks, it's totally fine. It is totally fine for you to hold your thoughts on that also. You can say to them, I really appreciate this. Thank you so much for the offer. And can I have some time to think about this? You do not have to dive directly into the negotiation. And some people get nervous and they're like, okay, I thank you so much for the offer. What was I supposed to ask for? What you can say, thank you so much. Can you send me that in writing? And I'd like a few days to consider and come back with you with any questions and thoughts I have. Don't feel the pressure to have to respond at that moment. If they've made you an offer, you are their person, okay?
If they won't give you time, if they don't give you time, that's a sign.
Yeah. Oh, that is an interesting sign too. So here's a couple notes here, folks, of things I was diving into ahead of myself. So, and we're going to send these slides out to you. But if they ask, what are your salary expectations? Here are some of the things that you can say. Okay. We've talked about these now today. Also, they offer you the job, thank them, ask for some time to consider, and just a note that make sure that you actually, it is with gratitude. and some enthusiasm for the job. Like the reality is now you're developing your relationship with them. They've chosen you. You're their top person. They're expecting to have to negotiate with you and do all of this, but they're really hoping to hire you for this
Right.
position. And so now you want to be like, thank you so much. I'm super excited. I really like this. Even if you're looking at the piece of paper and going, I'm not taking that salary. Even if you're looking at that piece of paper and saying, what? There's no what? There's no retirement match? Like, because sometimes they'll send it to you and follow up with a call like you've already seen it. Pretend it's beautiful, okay? And tell them you are super excited. Especially if you actually would really like to work there.
Yeah.
Right. And then
if you are moving, you can also talk about that too. Lior, help me out. But when I was relocating, I asked if they were willing to like help me with relocation expenses, like pack my things up and put them in a U-Haul type of thing.
Yeah.
They were not, but I still asked. So.
You should always ask. It does not hurt to ask ever. Don't feel like, yeah. The other that I just want to make sure that we're talking about here in the context of, we're not all in new job search mode, right? Some of us have been in our organizations for a long time, maybe a year or so, and we want to stay, but we might need to make some more money, or maybe we're interested in other job opportunities in the organization, that sort of thing. And that is a whole set of negotiation that I want you all to think about going into also. It used to be people would get really mad if you got an outside job offer and you came back and were like, I can get paid X if I just go over there. And people would be like, peace, go ahead, go take it. In the current economy, they might actually give you that raise. I have seen that actually more and more just in the last few months even. So I want you to go armed with some data about what you've been doing, what you've contributed, how you've grown. And then do your homework, just like we're talking about on salaries. What could you make if you went to a different organization? What are you worth really now that you've gotten another degree, or now that you've had another so many years of experience, that sort of thing? It might be actually even a different range for your job, and your organization might be slow to bring people up to speed on the ranges. So that happens every few years. An organization might look at their salaries and be like, whew, we need to fix our ranges, and they bump them, and they don't get everyone into them as quickly as they should, right? So you've got to advocate for yourself.
And it's probably cheaper for them to give you the raise than to onboard a whole new person that they're going to have to spend months.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right, Lior? Like there's a huge cost to an employer to find a new person versus keep someone, especially if they're good.
And the idea of ranges is a really important one, because that goes for throughout employment when you're applying and going forward, is make them be really realistic about how those ranges work, where people start and how do people actually move through them. And or are you going to start here at the bottom? You'll get a 3% raise when the bottom changes, and 5 years from now you're getting paid the same as a new hire that has no experience. So be really be a sleuth. Do your detective work.
It's a little different if it's union, so it's a little bit more
Sometimes,
specific, and you can max out.
Yeah,
I was union. I have my supervisees keep a document in their phone or somewhere of the extra things that they do, or the extra projects, or what they've done to go the extra mile in certain things, so that when it comes to a situation like this, they remember. Because we easily do all these projects and then we forget that we've actually done them. And if they're not on our job description, we don't, but keep track of those. And as your tickler file for a negotiation.
I also think that it is a reasonable, I guess we pay our dues in that way. Like, you start doing a project that it might be outside of your scope or your job, your position description. And then when that position is open, you're like, I've been doing this for X amount of months. This is what I've contributed to it. I'm the candidate, So that, a lot of stuff that we do, sometimes we have to take it for the team because we have to think about the long game.
Okay, I want to say a couple things from questions that are in the chat. So hold for just a moment, everyone, while I just move us through some resources, and then we're going to dive into some of the questions that are coming into the chat. So one is, there is a link here for a bunch of articles that were written by the exec of our North Carolina chapter. She did a series of articles on social work hiring stuff, and there's just a ton of great resources in here. So I would encourage you to check those out. And the other is a bunch of resources about interview prep. So if you're interested in this whole, like, how do I prep myself? How do I think about what questions they'll ask? What questions should I ask? That sort of thing. Here are some links here if you're thinking more about the interview itself. All right. Let's talk about what some of you are posing in the chat here. So one of these is, oh, there's so many things here. There's so many good things. So let's start with, I'm up for hard work and doing more, not up for providing unethical treatment or services. Okay, here's the deal, folks. You cannot work in an unethical work environment. You cannot do unethical things. You're a social worker, which means if you work in that place and you don't have positional power to change something yourself, then you have to ask other people to change it. You need to bring it to the attention of leadership. You need to say something. You see something, you say something, okay? And if the organization doesn't do anything about it and continues to be unethical, I need you to leave. And that might be a little bit cold and a little bit harsh, but I'm being honest with you. Like, there is vicarious liability in our world. And you could be held liable for something that other people do. You know what's happening. You've said something. You've decided to stay anyway. You've decided to be unethical now because they told you to. Just because someone told you to doesn't mean you need to do it. Okay. And so I need to give you just a little bit of freedom and a little bit of like a push to say, if your organization is being unethical, you might have to leave, and you should report them. If you need help with any of that, my contact info is going to be on the next slide, and I want you to call me, okay? That said, this whole licensure thing, there's a bunch of misunderstanding about licensure in our world. So we're not talking about licensure today, but we're going to just talk about it for a second because people are asking questions. You are a social worker. If you work in Minnesota and you do anything that looks, smells, seems like social work, direct practice, macro practice, policy, evaluation, anything in clinical work, anything in between, it does not matter if your organization requires you to be licensed or not. Licensure doesn't follow them. It follows you. So too often people come to me and are like, but my organization doesn't require licensure. I'm like, it doesn't matter. The law follows a trained social worker, okay? It doesn't matter if your job's called social worker. It's all about what the kind of work it is that you're doing. So if you look in our licensing law in the scope of practice and like what is the definition of practice in Minnesota, it's very broad. So if you have any questions about that, also, you should reach out. Let's talk about that, okay? You can also always call the Board of Social Work and ask your very specific question, all right? Shireen did put a link for one resource for liability insurance. That is who we recommend. I definitely recommend you looking into it. I want to turn, while I read some of these others, I want to see if our panelists have anything we haven't covered that you're like, ooh, I'm itching to make sure people hear this. What do y'all want to share?
So there was a question about it being an HR question related to salary. I don't know if I'm qualified to speak to that, but I would avoid it.
So maybe Lior and others might have thoughts, but someone had asked, what if you ask during an interview with the salaries and they tell you they don't know? And you know, what do we do there? Do you have thoughts on that, Lior?
My blunt self would say,
yeah,
well, we can talk another time. Walk out, say, contact me when you do. I mean, they've got to have an idea.
Mm-hmm.
It is not appropriate practice to interview people without knowing what you can actually budget for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if they say things like, well, it depends on qualifications, you can say, okay, here's my resume. Where do I fit?
Mhm.
Like now I'm actually asking, because often they put that in their post, like depends on qual. Okay, great. Well, I have an MSW, I have X number of years of experience, I have a BSW, I have X number of years of experience. This is what I'm coming in at. Where do I fit? Right? That is what they mean by DOQ. It depends on qualifications. Okay. So yeah, I think that's a really good point, Lior. Like they have to be able to answer that. And you can say to them, well, I'm super interested, but I really do need to know what the salary is. So you can let me know when you have an idea.
It's a good question of the what am I worth question for me is so much more than dollar amounts. It's also, is this worth your time?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Someone else was asking about, sorry, Angela, do you have another thought on that?
I was going to bring something up that Janelle mentioned about unionized positions. So it's been a while since I was in a position that was ununionized. And so it is important to know that they negotiate on your behalf to have like, that you're going to get a 2% or a 3%, whatever wage increase for some time. But sometimes there's a delay because the legislator has to approve things. And so you sometimes still have to be on top of like, hey, my check is short. Where are my coins? And so you have to, you do still need to be on top of that. But some of the inflation or cost of living increases, some of those things are considered in those types of positions. And so it is important for you to like know that that is a thing. There was a comment about, naming that. And so there are some institutions and some agencies that do consider those things. But then what Lior was talking about is that a lot of times you start at the bottom of that, and then you have an incremental increase based on your tenure there. So you should not be making what you started after 1 year, 5 years, 10, so on and so forth.
I think it's
and that
also
will very much depend on the union.
Exactly.
How well they negotiate that.
Let's not get into the details on the unions because it is very, very different. There's also lots of discussion about whether they're a good or a bad thing in our practice. So that's again, another session we do probably need to do at some point. That said, when we're thinking about negotiation, I also want you to think about your starting point, especially if you're a person that's moving from one position to another. You don't have to start fresh on everything. Angelo kind of alluded to that earlier when he was talking about PTO and that sort of thing. But if you're a person like I've been in the workforce a long time, I have a pretty decent amount of PTO that I get in my current job. I would not go to an organization and be okay starting over with 1 week of PTO. I would absolutely not be okay with that. And I think every person should think about themselves as starting from the place they're ending one place. Just like your salary doesn't start over again. Once you've made 55,000, you should make 55,000 and more going forward, period. Okay. So if you're used to a certain number of PTO days, if you're used to a certain number of, a certain other kinds of things that matter to you, some things are hard to negotiate, like how much they match your 401k contribution and that sort of thing, because those are set by the organization. So there are some things you're going to have more room and flexibility on than others, but just know that you shouldn't have to start over again.
Yeah.
There was one comment in the chat from someone about recently getting their LMSW license and presenting this to HR. And so they must be a person outside of Minnesota because we don't have LMSW. We have an LGSW is usually the equate there, a graduate social worker. So someone with a master's degree is my guess. But they brought that to their supervisor, said, I'm a new, I got my license now, and was told that the position doesn't require a license, and therefore it's really up to your supervisor's discretion if they pay you more or not. And what I want to say about that is similar to some of the things our panelists have been saying around the culture of the organization. And part of the reason we're opening up these conversations is that I want to see every one of you think of yourselves as change agents in your organizations. And it might not be today, but it's going to be likely very soon in the future, you're going to be that supervisor who has the discretion to pay people more because they got another degree, because they went to this amazing training, because they are now more skilled in something, or they've taken on a new responsibility, or they got a license, right? People are organizations. People are like, my organization says this. I'm like, who says that? A person says that. Almost always, right? Buildings don't make policies, people do. Okay.
Mhm.
So I want you to think about, like, who do I have to go and advocate myself? Who do I have to talk to? How do I navigate this? How do I negotiate it? And as I move up in the organization and I get to set the policy, I want to think about, what's the world I want to live in? For example, we've been working at NASW for years on saying to organizations, you should pay your interns. Absolutely, social work interns should be paid, period. And then we decided, we have to put our money where our mouth is. So we now pay our interns at NASW. We set the precedent, okay?
Mhm.
And that matters. And so we need to change the culture, all of us. And so we need to appreciate people. We need to raise their salaries. We need to be the ones at those tables saying, social workers have a ton of expertise they bring to the table. They should absolutely be paid in line with this nurse or this other provider of LPC or this blah, blah. I don't care who you're talking about.
Mhm.
We have just as much student loan debt. So we have to come to that table and say, this is what we're worth, folks. And the more that we do this, the more that we will lift up all of our profession also to get what we deserve.
I want to say a couple of things before I have to take off.
Yeah, go ahead, Angela.
So first and foremost, I want you all, so it was on the slide, but I think we kind of breezed over it. It is very important for us to find coaches and mentors when we are navigating these things, the space, because we don't know all things. And so sometimes, someone can let us know if we are off, if we are missing the mark, if the offer that was made was actually reasonable, or if it wasn't. And so I really encourage you all to find a mentor, to find a coach, to find someone that you could get good counsel from that can help guide you as you navigate these waters, uncharted territory, and make these decisions. I think that I would have probably made some different decisions had I been more informed. And so that leads me to my second point, is that I really think it is very, very, very important for you to have research and to know like where you are and like where you're going. I remember looking to like change the area of practice, right? And I had taken some classes in graduate school, and this was right around the time my father passed. And so I was like, oh, maybe I could go into like palliative care or like hospice or whatnot. And I was, I took the grief therapy class, like all of that kind of stuff. And I then talked to my professor about it. And she said, Angelo, it is very hard for you to break into that field specifically with no experience. And so I was like, yeah, I'm applying for jobs, and like nobody's calling me back. And she had been a nursing home a director or administrator for like a whole bunch of years. So she knew what she was talking about. And what I learned was that I would probably need to like volunteer and get some experience at one of those types of facilities in order to say, I do have some experience, and like to be able to come back, just like Janelle's supervisee, who said 2 years after she got more experience and was able to then reapply. So that is something that you get by talking to people who have been where you are trying to go or where you're thinking about going. And so I think that that advice is invaluable sometimes. Yep.
And Angelo, I want to thank you for that. I know you need to take off. We have one additional question in the chat that I'm going to answer, and then I'm going to ask Janelle and Lior if they have any final comments for everyone. Angelo, do you have anything final you want to say before you walk out?
Thank you for having me, everybody. I appreciate you spending your lunch hour with me.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
for being here.
Yeah, Angelo.
Bye, folks. So I promise we're going to be done in just a couple minutes. If you're just hanging on with us, folks, we're going to do just a couple of closing thoughts here. So my closing thoughts are the response to this question in the chat that's saying basically, you were a social worker at your agency, provided a 2-week notice and not allowed to fill your 2 weeks or prepare to terminate your clients. How do you handle something like that when you're just told to leave? So here's the thing, and that's where I was saying before, you guys, there are lots of unethical things that happen in our organizations. And just because they force you to do something unethical doesn't mean you have to be unethical also. But what your response is to that may differ. I would give you different advice depending on the circumstances. So I'm going to say a couple things. One is, here's my contact info. If you need to do an ethics consult, which this one in my mind, this is an ethics consult, you can absolutely call me or email me and set up a time to meet with me. Okay. This one in particular, I've answered at least 4 times this year. So this is not, you are not the only one who's gone through this. It is some organization's sort of MO to fire people and walk you out that day, even though we know as social workers that we need to terminate. We need to have good termination. We need to make sure our clients get appropriate referrals and know their options and all of those sorts of things. My response to you will depend on what type of organization you're in. And if it's private practice, if you have contact information for your clients, if you can terminate ethically outside the scope of the organization, I might tell you to do that. In other times, I might say to you, you have to follow up with that organization and send them a letter or something in writing saying, here's what I should have been allowed to do and what should be done, and you name it and you claim it so that you're doing what you can to release any liability to them. There's lots of answers to that one in particular, but I want to say, like, it is on you to say something, to say to that organization, I'm a social worker and good termination with my clients matters. And it's very important to me that they hear what their options are, that they have closure with me. Some organizations will say, sorry, we're not going to let you talk to them anymore. We'll follow up with your clients, and you will have to trust that and walk away. I also would say, if your boss or someone else in leadership is a social worker, I would hope that you also make a complaint against them to our licensing board. Okay, because that's unethical practice. Okay, so but there's so much in the nuance here. So take all of that with a grain of salt and reach out to someone who can give you some really good advice. I might be that person or someone else also. Okay.
Karen, how do you
Janelle,
feel about the 2 weeks?
Yeah.
How do you feel about the 2 weeks versus 4 weeks? Because 2 weeks in a non-client situation, 4 weeks is what I have felt is when there's clients involved.
I think there is no perfect number. I think that the respectful number is 2 weeks. Anything beyond 2 weeks makes your life and their life more complicated. It also can be really good. So I would say it absolutely depends on the role that you're in and how much termination makes sense in that space. I know too many people who give too long and then they really wish they hadn't, because you're a short timer, like people are already saying goodbye to you, like it's this weird thing, so don't stretch it out. And then there's other times where it's like, there's only 2 weeks left of group, like you should stay for a 3rd week, like do termination well in what makes sense for your particular position. Okay. Okay, so Janelle, Lior, final comments, and we do have a question in the chat about what do you think about imposter syndrome. So if either of you have reflections on that, would love to hear your thoughts.
I do, definitely. I did want to use that as my closing thoughts, was thinking about that imposter syndrome thought. As someone who's coming into a new career in middle age, really changing the type of work I do, and then also struggling with just having been socialized as a girl, being LGBTQ, being someone who's BIPOC, who's red as white. Imposter syndrome is absolutely like my bread and butter. That's how I live. And I think we've heard a lot throughout the course of today that so much of negotiating and applying and even just working in an organization comes down to communication. And that's what I would like to really underline, which is talk to your classmates, talk to your colleagues, talk to a mentor, talk to your classmates to find a mentor. Get yourself connected. You'll most likely hear that honestly, I don't know of a single social worker who doesn't deal with imposter syndrome around at least one aspect of life. And that can be really, really helpful to hear. Yeah. And we're all in it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lior. Appreciate that. How about Janelle?
My final comments would be, many of us are retiring, but just because we're retiring from our work doesn't mean we're retiring from being social workers and being mentors. And those of us who retire, I'm semi-retired, have time and want to give that. So when you're thinking about a mentor, think about your elders. It's kind of hard to say that because I used to be the youngest in my field. Think about us and use your alumni association or use your school of social work to connect to those of us who can be there and have time to support you as well as mentors, and then be open to the journey. You might think you want to go down one path, and believe me, I never thought I'd be sitting here in New Orleans, Louisiana, but be open to the journey because it will bring magical things for you.
I love that. Lior, were you going to say something? I saw that. Okay. All right. So I want to thank you all for being with us today. Janelle and Lior, thank you so much for all the insights and stories and things that you shared, and to Angelo too, who had to step away, but thanks for sharing so much of your own experiences. Clearly, we should have made this a 90-minute scheduled thing. Now, in retrospect, we know what it actually takes to talk about this. And there's a lot more we could have spent time on. So folks, thanks for hanging out. We had a good number of our crowd who hung out for the whole thing till the end here, so we appreciate that. I would say, join NASW if you're not already a member. One of the ways that you can stay connected to other professionals and get connected to other professionals is by being active in your professional associations. So NASW would love to have you, would love to get you connected up with people and that sort of thing. Use us as a resource. When you're a member, you start getting our newsletter, you hear all sorts of things that are happening at the chapter. Would love to have you engaged with us. There's also just a ton of resources available, some on our website, the Minnesota chapter website, and also at socialworkers.org for NASW, our national office. Tons of these articles and resources and things that you can go to later, including an up-to-date copy of the Code of Ethics, all sorts of things. We have a lot of work we are doing every day on behalf of the profession, and including working on an interstate compact for licensure, including conversations that have spun up considerably in the recent days around abortion rights and a million other things, literally, that we are working on. And so I would hope that you would ante in and be a part of your professional association, help us be strong together. With that, I really appreciate you all being here, and I wish you all the best in your journey, in whatever is ahead for you in your job search and negotiation. And I wish you luck along that way, and hope that we can all rise up as a profession in the ranks of getting paid what we're worth and getting the benefits that we deserve and all of that. And it will take all of us to continue to grow our place in the world also. So with that, have a fantastic day, folks, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.